kind of start looking at the competency framework and case studies now that Aaron has put everyone off doing CIMA. ACCA numbers are going to rocket, that's okay. So Aaron focused really on the kind of the pathway through the qualification and then the objective test. What I want to look at is more the competency framework itself. We'll talk about the changes and how it's all come about from a CIMA perspective, and then also look at what it's going to mean for how the case studies are marked, because it will be quite different. The only kind of example we have here, the only case study originally was the full T4 one. So I'll use some of the examples from T4, the old question, and show you now what the questions are going to be like on the new strategic case study, and they're quite different. So what I want to focus on is why the change, on that briefly, what has changed, how it's going to affect you, and then what you need to do from this point onwards. So it will take about kind of 15-20 minutes or so. If there's any questions, again, as we go through, just shout as we go through, I'll answer them then, or keep them to the end, it's fine. So why the change? Basically, about every 5 years, CIMA does a lot of research and consultation on the syllabus. It's all about keeping the syllabus relevant, basically. So they talk to employers, they talk to finance professionals, students, and everything else, and see what everyone has to say about the syllabus. Basically, they're checking if CIMA qualifieds are how they're thought of, and that's what they ask the employers. How are the CIMA people that we put into your businesses performing, basically? So a lot of the feedback this time, employers told CIMA lots of things and challenges they were having currently, but also a lot of things and skills they were going to need in the future, so CIMA can build that in. Also, employers said that when CIMA qualified for coming into their businesses, they had lots of skills missing. So they had the technical competencies, but they didn't have all the other things. They didn't have the leadership skills, the business skills, and everything else, and that was an issue. Also then, students themselves, and you'll see this now when we look at kind of examples of the changed case study questions. Students said that the way that you're tested in CIMA has nothing to do with the workplace. That it felt completely, like when was the last time your boss asked you to sit down and write a 3-hour paper, or write a report in 3 hours and things? It doesn't happen, basically. So students wanted it to be more real life, basically. And so when we look at the new case study questions now, that's what they've tried to do with them. But CIMA took all this feedback and they developed a competency framework, which is a bit different. It used to be just a kind of information-based syllabus, whereas now the competency framework is quite a different thing. Now it's more about competencies as opposed to just knowledge. So, and this will kind of run through how everything is marked. So it reflects the knowledge and skills that the business world is seeking now and also in the future, basically. So CIMA have reckoned they've kind of future-proofed the syllabus for the next number of years. CIMA are pretty much confident that the competency framework will allow them to identify what needs to be changed in the syllabus. So they're going to use the competency framework now to drive and identify what should be in the syllabus and what shouldn't be, and that's going to be the big kind of driver for all the change. It's going to provide a much more employer focus, so as when you do go to businesses, that employers reckon you do have all the competencies and not just the technical ones. Be more relevant to members. We'll look at different proficiency levels. It's not just, there's 3 levels in the qualification. There's 4 proficiency levels, and it's kind of lined up to the syllabus. We'll talk about those briefly in a sec. But overall and ultimately, this is about increasing the employability of CIMA members. They reckon this will make CIMA members much more employable because they'll be much more well-rounded, basically, and have all the skills instead of just the accounting skills. So what has changed? All the things you'll have heard of. There are lots of changes. Aaron's already, I think, scared you with most of it. But the content, what's actually going to change in terms of what you'll be assessed on, is probably the smaller part of the change. So the syllabus changes themselves, that's just going to be new topics. You're just going to be learning different things, that's very straightforward. How you will be assessed is the big thing, and that can be broken down into a number of aspects. So there'll be computer-based assessment, which you'll know about. All your exams are now going to be on computer, that's fine. The inclusion of more case studies. A case study now at each level, so we'll talk about the relevance of the competency framework for that. And then the use of the competency framework for itself. Basically, the competency framework has now essentially become a marking scheme almost for the CIMA exams. The existing structure remains, as Aaron said, 3 kind of pillars, 3 levels of achievement, and so on. So that's all stays the same. Now, this is what CIMA said, and I wanted to put this on because it is important and kind of gives you some insight into what they're thinking. But an important change is the ability to more rigorously assess the high-level competencies. So you have the technical skills, but not all the others. That allows students to demonstrate a fuller understanding of the topics, and that's what they're going to do in the case study. And the objective tests are going to make sure you've got the knowledge. In the case study, they're going to probe that much further and try and find out if you really understand the competencies and can demonstrate the competencies. So competencies go beyond the core accounting and finance skills into leadership skills and so on. So this is really what CIMA said. This is why CIMA has changed it. And it's going to allow them to test that you have all the competencies instead of just the basic accounting knowledge. So this is the competency framework itself, the CGMA one. So it's made up of technical skills, business skills, people skills, and leadership skills. And you'll see this and another version of this in the book that's there and some of the handouts. The technical skills is what everyone has or what you're kind of supposed to have come out of the qualification. The business, people, and leadership skills are what the criticism about saying that they weren't there. So the business skills are about understanding the business model, objectives, missions, and so on. People skills about negotiation and influencing, and then leadership skills about kind of leading teams within the organisation. Again, ethics, integrity, and professionalism underpins the whole piece. I mentioned proficiency levels. Now, one of the things that this framework is supposed to do is recognises that at different levels within the organisation, you need different mixes of these skills. So at the junior level of the organisation, you need lots of technical skills, but not as much leadership skills. And as you move through your career and through the proficiency levels, you need less technical skills and more on the leadership and business and so on. And again, the competency framework tries to line this up with the syllabus to make sure that that's what you get. So the competencies themselves, now the first one I've kind of broken down to show that this is technical skills. So you'll see in technical skills, a lot of it is at foundational and intermediate and less so advanced. So foundation, intermediate, and advanced basically line up with operational management and strategic. The fourth level that was on there, expert, this basically happens after you finish your CIMA qualification. Through CPD and so on, then you become an expert in your chosen field. But here, this is how it's broken down. Now if we look at the next one, business skills, you'll see that there's a lot less at level 1 and much more at level 2 and 3. The same with people skills, a lot less at 1, much more 2 and 3. And then the final one, leadership skills, there's nothing at foundational level. There's nothing at level 1. It's all at 2 and 3. So it's at those later levels of the syllabus you have to demonstrate those competencies. Now, this table summarises the mix that you're supposed to have. So you'll see at operational level, you're expected about 64% of the content syllabus is technical, right through to only 6% leadership. And then if you go to the other side, the strategic, it's got 24% only technical. In fact, that's a very even split, 24, 2 25s and 26. So you're expected to be fairly well-rounded and be able to demonstrate all the competencies, not just the technical at that point. The expert one then, which is beyond your qualification, you can see that technical is only 13% and leadership is 39%. So it does suggest, and it's understandable, foundational roles require higher technical skills, but as you become more and more senior, it's less about the technical stuff and more about the leadership and the influencing and so on.
Sorry, so
Yes,
is that computer suite expert?
No, C-suite, so like CFO, CEO, CEO, so chief executive. How it will affect you. So basically, the changes here, like these changes are about how you're going to be assessed and essentially how you're going to be marked. And if you want to pass exams, you need to understand how you're going to be assessed and how you're going to be marked, basically. So that's why the competency framework has become so important. So if we look at some examples comparing the case study that we had, the T4 one to the strategic level one, you can see the difference. This was the assessment matrix. This was the thing you had to learn for T4. This was how you were going to be assessed. It was very clear. There was analysis, strategic choices, and then recommendations. Basically the rational model. So position, choice, and action. And you were marked on that basis. There was different marks. You can see overall 40 of the marks were for recommendations. That was the most important bit. So in there you've got technical, you've got prioritization. There are some competencies and skills. But it's quite different now. And how it's going to look now, and how it looks for the current practice one, is more like this. So on are analysis, choices, and recommendations, and in we now have essentially the competency framework. So it's technical, business, people, and leadership. So the marking scheme for the strategic level case study is basically the competency framework. Now if you remember at strategic level, the mix was basically 25 each, and so that's how it's going to be marked. If this was the marking scheme for the operational level case study, then technical would be much more highly weighted. It would be 60 odd right down to lower levels for the other three. So completely different, being marked in a totally different way, and now it's all competency focused. So we'll look at one of the questions, then I can kind of come back to this and show you. In T4, the question was always the same. You had 3 hours and you were asked to prepare a report that prioritises, analyses and evaluates the issues facing the company and make appropriate recommendations. 3 hours. That was 90% of the marks. So it was open, basically, and you had to have some sort of structure around it to try and do it.
And Paddy, just to be clear, that was the actual requirement every single time
Yeah.
in T4? There was no change?
The only thing that changes is the name of the company. Basically.
Yeah.
So, but that is, and that has been the T4 question since we've been doing T4. That part's worth 90 marks. This, do an email with 10 bullet points, that's worth 10 marks, and that's about communication. But that's how it was marked, basically, and that's what you were being asked to do. The strategic level case study is completely different. It's not as wide open, and we were kind of saying earlier about it might be harder to figure out what they're asking. To some extent, there'll be parts of it that'll be easier. It's going to be more direct, and it's going to be more in the workplace. So this is the intention. So there's a lot of words here, but I've underlined some of the important bits. So this is task 1 in the practice exam. Anyone seen the practice exam for the strategic level case study? Well, this is basically task 1. I hope you slept well last night because today is going to be busy. That's the first word you read when you sit down and do your strategic level case study. Brilliant. So I've got a letter, I need a response, I need it this afternoon. My big worry is keeping everybody happy. So straight away it's getting into the kind of people aspect of things, because it's strategic level, it's not just going to be about technical. Basically though, give me a list of all stakeholders, along with an explanation as to why each one's affected. So stakeholder map, do a list of stakeholders, why each one's going to be affected, it's nice and direct. I also need you to think about Arnold, he's the main shareholder. What are we going to do with him basically? Need to keep him happy at all costs. So in stakeholder analysis, he's a key player. And we need to think about exactly what we're going to do with it. I know this doesn't leave you much time, but I need all that within the hour. The first section is going to be in 3 sections. You have 60 minutes basically to complete this section, and then you move on to the next section. So you have to complete all this. So you have to do a list of stakeholders, you have to say how they're all going to be affected, you have to have a think about Arnold, the main shareholder, and you have to come up with a strategy for dealing with them basically. Now, if we go back and look at the marking scheme, task 1, in technical, for dealing with Arnold, as the main shareholder, so there's some technical aspects there, there's 4 marks. In business, for identifying stakeholders, 13 marks. So that's for coming up with a list of stakeholders and saying how each one's going to be affected. In the people, there's 4 marks again for dealing with Arnold. You're expected to, be able to understand his concerns, what he might be worried about, and so on. And then in leadership, there's 5 marks for the identifying stakeholders and another 5 marks for Arnold as well, because that's about being able to kind of lead and identify the stakeholders and take them all to a certain place and everything else. So the marks are split by the competencies. The marks aren't split anymore based on the analysis, options, and action. So that was task 1. So it's very direct. So some people might prefer this. Instead of here's 3 hours, write a report, this more direct might actually help.
Yeah.